thank you everyone for attending this webinar this morning. Similar to Nicole, I'm also struggling with a bit of a cold, and excuse my gruffish voice from time to time. I'm going to be doing a lot of speaking, so hopefully it's not going to be too much of a drama. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview on the next couple of hours. I'll leave you to just go through the details on the screen, whilst I'll just give probably a broader overview of where we're coming from and how we've put the whole program together. So obviously it's about export capability building, and hopefully you'll all find a lot of value in this. As Nicole mentioned, we've got a broad assembly of innovators, startups, entrepreneurs, founders who, no doubt, you're on your path to scaling, you're at different stages of your journey. Export development may be around the corner, or for some or most of you, not for a while. In terms of the sectors sitting in on this webinar, or some who may not be, but will be receiving copies later, we've got livestock biosecurity, seaweed extraction, seafood, snacks and beverages for the consumer market, and a host of Agtech suppliers covering grain grading, micro honey extraction solutions, crop seeding, food and beverage waste value add, agricultural impact investment platform, grain analysis platform, vet biotech, and drone flight app for livestock monitoring. So as you can tell, it is pretty broad. So how do we pull this all together for all of you to get as much benefit out of this? So it's been framed in as broad and general terms as possible to present export fundamentals and concepts that will help guide your business growth ambitions. The aim is to provide a solid platform which should enable you to consider how ready or not you are for export and the milestones required. So a little bit more about Export Connect. Our founder, Najib Lawand, is also sitting in on the call. Najib founded the business back in 2017. Between Najib and myself, we've got decades of experience in export, both from exporting a range of various products in our various capacities in our previous lives. Yeah, we've been exporting these to multiple markets, but more recently, we're in the consulting and advisory space across food, beverage, and agribusiness. We work with state trade agencies, national and state industry bodies, and directly with companies as well. So to this extent, we have applied our knowledge, our experiences, including real market applications, which hopefully will provide an insightful, broad-based program that will provide a platform for further development. Just in terms of the team, next to me is Alexia, one of our project executives. We're also supported by Ujan Pad, heading up our projects team, as well as Sophie. So everyone played a role in contributing to the next couple of hours. So you've all had an opportunity to look at that slide, and information will be relayed at future dates well in advance. So the agenda covers a fair number of topics. As I mentioned, they're going to be fairly broad-based. And, for some of you, as we go through the slides, there's going to be some less relevancy. But given the mix of businesses, you all should hopefully get a fair bit of information out of it. There is a little bit, not much, on the food and beverage consumer market. Now, I know most of you are not in that space, but there are some of you who are in the space. So just bear with us when we go through those slides. So, what was Agtech? And we just look at a scene running a couple of years ago, and, fast forward to where we are today. So in looking at this entire space, it's just phenomenal, the advancements that technology are making across our lives, and how vital it is in our Agtech space. So kicking off, are you ready for export? We look at it in very broad terms across what the hidden risk is and the value of assessment. And in our business, we see many export failures occur even before the first shipment leaves. Companies who think they are ready for export simply are not. So it requires a lot of self-assessment. This will save you money, protect your brand, and increase the success of by having the proper due diligence going forward. In terms of assessing where you are with your business, we look at 5 interlinked pillars of export readiness. And I'm going to cover each of these in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So covering organizational capabilities, manufacturing capabilities, resource constraints, financial capacity, and leveraging the support that is available for you. So in terms of organizational capabilities, now we talk about an organization, some of you attending this or have signed up for the program, may only be 1 or 2 people. So, forget the terminology. So it could, as I say, it could be a larger organization or just a smaller entity. So what is the leadership mindset all about? What is what are the growth requirements? How are you looking at it from both a domestic point of view? And even though this is very early stage for many of you, what are your thoughts going to be in terms of looking at the export market at a future date? What are the internal skills and capabilities within the team? So ensuring that if and when one starts embarking on the export journey, you've got the right skill level, or if not, those skills need to be addressed. From a decision-making process point of view, who's going to make the decisions, who's going to carry out the activities, and then we look at operational agility. So again, just diving into a little bit about each of these in the next few slides. So your leadership mindset, we're looking for a long-term commitment, and we say to anyone who we talk to involved in the export process, it's not a quick win situation. It requires commitment, it requires patience. Things don't often happen straight up to plan. So you just need to be aware of that. In terms of the organizational alignment, it comes back to senior leadership or the founder being aligned on goals, risks, and investment. So from an internal skills and experience point of view, does anyone have international business experience? My guess is for most, if not all of you attending, probably not. Once you start going down the path, there's going to be a little bit of export documentation knowledge required. Now, a lot of this can come from your state industry support organizations. Depending on the markets that one goes to, and largely we are talking Southeast Asia, perhaps North Asia, in terms of the way this program is going to develop. Having an understanding of the cultural considerations. We find a market like Singapore as an example, and we talk about Singapore in a little bit more detail later on. Culturally, not all that far aligned from an Australian position, but when you start looking at a market such as Korea, if that's ever on the radar, very different cultural requirements for that kind of a market. So once you step forward through this program, market dependent, be aware of the cultural communication skills that are required. And then finally, export logistics and supply chain knowledge. This is obviously going to be critical to prevent mistakes happening, to prevent costing errors, product not arriving when it should arrive, etc. So these are the kind of internal skills and experience one would need to develop. I'm not going through all the ask yourselves at the bottom. It's just some thought provokers when you get a chance to sit down and review the slides at a future date. So it just helps you align your thinking in terms of getting the proper processes in place. In terms of manufacturing capabilities, is your production ready for global markets? And again, I've said before, I'm being fairly broad-based over here because you come from a vast array of different skill sets and product and service offers. One of the things that we generally talk to, irrespective of what the company is production capacity. You're selling to the Australian market, and you've got X volume going out the door every month or every second month. All of a sudden, you crack a big export order. How are you going to be able to scale up to deliver on the quantities required? We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Obviously, product consistency, that's got to be 100% on point all the time. The quality control, quality assurance plays a role here, and then compliances and adaptation. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail here. So as I mentioned, your supply balance, can you meet increased demand without hurting domestic supply? So don't take on, if you're successful for export, be aware that you don't try and bite off more than you can chew. From a production planning point of view, for those of you who are currently planning, how does it impact the planning in terms of raw material sourcing, equipment sourcing, scaling up machinery? So these are the kind of factors that come into play. From a product consistency point of view, and particularly in the international market, the buyers have got a high level of expectation. Whether it's industry buyers, whether it's retail buyers, the quality is absolutely paramount. Traceability, extremely important. Or, depending on what product offer or service offer you have, will have a lower requirement or a higher requirement. Certainly in the food and beverage space, should there be a problem from a QA point of view, you need to be able to trace the production or trace the end product back to when the production was made, etc. So this is really important. And then depending on the market will depend on the documentation requirements. Certainly from our experience in food and beverage, some markets are a lot more stringent than others. But again, from service suppliers, equipment suppliers, it may vary also from market to market. Okay, again, just some considerations at the bottom. Again, just some common sense questions to ask yourself. In terms of decision-making and operational agility, can you make informed decisions for overseas opportunities? What kind of information do you need? Do you need to get into the markets, visit them before you commit to the market? It's absolutely critical that informed decisions are made to ensure success. Too often we find that someone's unhappy about their export sales or export initiatives. They haven't assessed the market, the feasibility, the viability for the particular market that they've chosen. Decision authority. Again, I guess all much smaller companies, your startups, expecting that in most cases you'll be the decision-making authority in export and most likely for domestic as well. Your operational preparedness, again, it links back a little bit to what I've covered already. Can you handle the increased complexity in production, logistics, and particularly customer service? For those of you with more technical kinds of products, it's going to be really important for someone to pick up the phone or email in terms of trying to remedy an issue in an overseas market. Again, some questions to ask yourself in terms of getting your heads around this process. Resource constraints. Production-wise, are you ready for global markets? Can you maintain the higher demand, the quality that goes with it? There's a time commitment that's attached to it. How long will it take you to scale up? Having the right people in place, covering any knowledge gaps, and what I mentioned a while ago, building your cultural awareness to grow into those markets. In terms of the time commitment, export is not a side project. It requires dedication and focus because you don't want to make mistakes in the early phases. That will really put a dampener and probably kill any export ambitions, which can cost a lot of money. In terms of being actively engaged in export markets, highly recommended. You've got regular market visits. Relationship building is so important, particularly in the Asian market, understanding the local conditions. There's a bit of a juggle with meeting in different timeframes. In the main, probably the shorter to medium term, we are looking at the ASEAN or Asian market. So the time difference between Australia and there is not all that different. But obviously, should there be opportunities in Europe or the UK, just having those considerations for the different business hours. And ensuring one's got the ongoing communication between yourselves and business partners that you have in overseas markets. It's vital to establish those relationships and communicate regularly. Too often we find that companies say that things aren't going well in the market. One of the first things that we ask is, well, what's the relationship like? What is their reporting like? How much energy and effort are you giving to them? So it is very much a two-way street in terms of ensuring that there's success on both sides. Just touching quickly on people power. And again, touched on this just a short while ago. Who will own the export responsibilities? Will they have the decision-making process? On the other side, it's potentially going to be yourselves who we're talking about, but I'm just talking about the broader responsibilities in bigger companies as well. Continuity planning, should someone be looking after export if they're away or ill, who can pick up the slack? It's just really assessing the risk that could happen should the right person in your business who's responsible for that is not available when they should be available. Some knowledge gaps that you may be having at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit more to that in a while, certainly after our short break. Incoterms, I'm not sure to what extent any of you are familiar what Incoterms means. Fundamentally, international commercial terms which define the responsibilities between a buyer and seller, FOB, which is free on board, CIF, cost, insurance, freight, which these impact pricing and liability. As I said, I'll go through this in just a little bit more detail in a while. Understanding your export pricing, what duties or taxes may be payable. Bearing in mind, Australia does have a lot of duty-free arrangements in most Asian markets. Be aware of that, but depending on certain categories, it could be other taxes that are applicable. Again, depending on how you go to market, if you're using distributors, there'll be margins required for them, and retail pricing or end user pricing that will vary in different markets. And again, I spent quite a little bit of time on this later on in the session. The cultural etiquette in trade negotiations, understand what that looks like. Going into meeting room in an Asian market. They're very much dominated by age of the, say you're meeting a team and the eldest and who's a decision maker in terms of business card etiquette and things like that. So these are important to understand to ensure there's a good flow between yourselves and your potential partners. Again, some training options to consider. There is quite a bit on offer. And then we talk about financial capacity, and so important, irrespective of what product or service you have, is cash flow management, understanding your pricings and margins, what your risk is, and also to what extent you may have currency exposure. So the cash flow reality, again, it's absolutely vital upfront that once you've got your export plans and ambitions underway, what is your cash flow going to look like? In many cases, your client, your customer, your end user may be asking for terms, could be 60, could be 120 days. That creates cash flow gaps. The ideal is to have a situation where you get paid up front. Now, that's not an unusual requirement, certainly in the food and beverage space, that an order is placed by a distributor or retailer, and maybe they'll pay half up front and the balance on shipping. So it really is going to come down to your negotiation skills and tactics to try and minimize the exposure to a delayed cash flow. So, looking through the process in terms of when you may receive cash, depending on your circumstances, you've got your production occurring at a point in time, followed by shipment and arrival, and then your payment cycle after it's arrived, assuming that the end user, client or customer will only pay then. You may have promotional spend to cover off. And other market activations and things like that. So again, without having an active cash flow plan in place, you could do yourself a little bit of harm. Some upfront costs that you may incur are the packaging changes to meet international requirements. This is probably more applicable again for food and beverage. I'm not, it's probably unlikely in the more technical side of things. It's something you just need to be aware of. Regulatory approvals, compliance documentation. So in some cases, there may not be much upfront cost. In other cases, slightly higher cost. But also, as mentioned before, so important for your market visits, trade show participations. These are the kind of necessary costs to incur. I guess the good thing is, is that there are government or state grants that are available, which you can show through appropriate invoicing and what the cost incurred was in terms of the marketing research of your business, and you can in cases get money back. One of the bigger fundings that's available is called through Austrade, the EMDG. I'm not going to go into that in much detail, but it's an export market development grant. But as I said, there are other resources available to get some government assistance, whether it's at state or federal. Touching on pricing and margin, as I mentioned earlier, I'll go into this into a little bit more detail, but just be aware that there are a number of levels where you could have your margin eroded. If you're using a distributor, if you're using a middleman, an agent, a broker, they'll take a percentage of margin, or they may take a flat fee. Promotional spend, activation spend, again, it depends on the nature of your business. If it's more consumer related, there's a brand awareness to consider. But there are those of you who are not sort of about the brand awareness. It's about meeting a need, which could be in like on a farm or something like that. So it's it really is, I guess, horses for courses in terms of how and if your promotional spend is required. Freight increases, currency volatility, shipping costs fluctuate significantly. For those of you who aren't aware, if you weren't involved in the export space previously, COVID saw shipping costs escalate dramatically, more than double. Air freight went through the roof. By and large, there's been normalization, but in some cases, depending on whom you speak to, it just quite hasn't landed back in terms of the freight costs. Obviously, there's currency volatility, and again, going forward, it depends how you wish to trade, and there's various tactics in terms of locking in a currency, so just be aware of that. I think by and large, our Australian dollar is fairly stable at the moment. I guess where we are seeing some bumps in the road is Donald Trump waking up with a new tariff idea one day, rattles the markets, and nothing happens. So these are I guess the daily grinds of ensuring that from a currency point of view, there's not too much volatility around. Again, some considerations for you to work through. At the end of the day, a lot of work needs to go in to ensure your profitability. Some risk management criteria, identifying, mitigating export risks. Payment we've covered. What happens if your overseas buyer doesn't pay? The payment terms negotiations. For those of you who aren't aware, there's what a letter of credit is. It's effectively an arrangement between your bank and the buyer's bank, where the funds that the purchaser will ultimately pay. So that de-risks any payment issues, but it is a bit of a process to work through. So ensure you've got that diligence in terms of the payment risk. Covered the currency risk and what you can do in terms of hedging and pricing for volatility. It really comes down to your own requirements. Insurance options. Ensure that your cargo is insured either via yourselves or via the customer. If for argument's sake you have a contract that's FOB or free on board, then by default the customer will cover any cost. Whether they choose to insure it or not is for them. But if you get into arrangement where you're responsible for the delivery to the overseas port, highly recommended you insure it. And then there's also IP risk, which is extremely important. Protecting your brand and trademarks in overseas markets, registering your trademarks, or any licensing agreements. I think what one generally finds more so in the food and beverage space, that some companies, prefer not to do it. They will take that risk. There are certain markets overseas where the labels are copied. There's been some famous cases of Penfolds wine, Penfolds Grange wine turning up in bottle shops in China. That didn't quite come from Penfolds. So just be aware of your IP risks as well going forward. So coming to the end of this first section is who can help you in your export journey. As mentioned, you've got industry and government, there's mentors, there's networks, supply chain partners, and specialized consultants. From industry and government, who can offer market intelligence, the connections, export development initiatives, grant assistance, as I've mentioned. And then from an external support point of view, network, get expert advice. For those of you who don't make much use of LinkedIn, look for like-minded people, look for like-minded companies, follow them. Excuse me. There's a massive amount of information available on LinkedIn to help you in that whole networking space. Supply chain partners and specialists, freight forwarders, they know the industry, certainly in terms of compliances and handling requirements. Some of you may choose to use export consolidators. Now, I guess consolidators is probably more common in the food and beverage space, where one company will represent, get product or consolidate product locally in Australia and supply it into a client's warehouse overseas, but probably not as relevant for many of you on this call who have signed up. So to a large extent, your shipments will go over via LCL, which is part container. Your products are consolidated onto pallets with other suppliers' pallets, and the product goes over to the market. And your cost is pretty much determined by your cubic size and weight. But I'll leave that for another day to get more information on. Market entry support, you've got in-market consultants who in turn can navigate the cultural nuances, what the regulations are, distribution networks. Certainly the companies, whether they're distributors or agents that you work with in overseas markets, provided you've done the due diligence with them, they will provide a huge amount of support. And distribution partners, again, depending on your category, but these are the guys who understand the market sector, the product categories that you're in, who your target market is. They're managing export, they're managing international suppliers all the time. So these guys have got a wealth of information as well. In terms of a readiness checklist, it's just something as a, for you to go away with at the end of the session. It really is a summary of what we've covered in the last little while. Without prejudging any of you, my guess is it's going to be sitting somewhere between 1 and 2, hopefully a 3, at best case a 4 for most of you. But it just gives you a snapshot of, okay, let's just choose worst case. I'm either a 1 or a 2. Then hopefully through this program, you can slowly start moving through to 3, 4, and 5. Just excuse me for the dog bark. I'm not on a farm. It's not the cattle dog. This is actually being presented from my apartment. The internet connectivity at our new offices is not what it should be. So just apologies for the odd bark in the background. So key lessons, strategic patience. It's okay to pause export plans until you're truly ready. It's not when you think you're ready. Rushing to market can ultimately cost more than waiting. Ensure you've got all your capability gaps closed, and take control. We often find in the work we do is a supplier, they'll jump at an opportunity for export. It's reactive because someone said, hey, that's a great product and we can do X and Y for you. And they jump on board, and 2-3 months later, they've learned they've made a mistake. It just hasn't been the right due diligence. So it's a deliberate process, choosing your timing and first export market. And again, some key decision factors to take into play. So we'll cover off the basics of export for the next while. Again, I've tried to be as generic as possible. And as we work through it, for each of you, you may find super relevance or less relevance, but the principles certainly, we believe, are there. So in terms of why export, there's a lot of information over here. To a degree, some of it's already been covered off. And these are just some thought starters in terms of the, giving export more of some game time in your strategic planning going forward. Obviously, it can offer economies of scale. You're not just producing for the domestic market. You've identified an opportunity in a specific market through research or through, market knowledge, attending trade fairs. Getting extra sales through export helps alleviate risk, provided you're doing the right due diligence. It's market diversification. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, being Australia. For some of you, it may not be all that applicable in terms of seasonal advantages. It really depends on what you do. Obviously, we're Southern Hemisphere. Much of the planning for all of this is more Northern Hemisphere, but typically it's also, in many markets, also quite humid. You want sales growth. You've got a brand image you want to improve. When people talk about their brand, it's available in X and Y outlets or areas in Australia, and we also supply into certain markets, and that helps build your brand credibility. Premium price opportunities, because, and I'm linking it to a comment just further down the road, Brand Australia. People understand what Australia is. I'm talking overseas people. They understand the quality that sits behind Brand Australia, the clean, the green, the expertise. And to this extent, many products that land overseas do attract a premium price. So, depending on what you are supplying, you're able to hopefully substantiate that because of the association with Brand Australia. You may be first to market in a particular area. Again, talks to product quality against your competitors is certainly areas within your product or service that your competitors don't cover, which also in turn can add to your premium price proposition. You may want to attract investment. Some of you already may have investment from VC or other areas. Once you can demonstrate extra potential via export, you might be able to gain extra investment dollars. It helps with, building extra connections and inquiries through being visible in overseas markets. We spoke a little bit earlier to, developing your capabilities. You've got to scale up for capacity. Again, depending on the market that you're servicing here in Australia, where international markets are very, very savvy, very well developed in terms of e-commerce. So that's something that you can play to. You've got technology, life cycle advantages, and also really important, and it's coming into play, in every facet of the kind of work we do is support for ESG and sustainability. Sustainability is pretty much on everyone's radar. It's being acted on, it's being reported on. So it is absolutely critical that if those of you who aren't pushing the sustainability bucket, it's certainly worth getting on board and promoting it. In terms of our training and mentoring, we talk about the 6 C's of sustainable export success. Clarity, connections, capability, commitment, cash and cost to serve. So your clarity of purpose. And again, just a little bit, we talked about in the past, but it's, pulling it together in another format. It's having purpose within the organization. You've got you putting importance behind the export journey, that it is going to be relevant for your journey. Ensuring that you've got the right connections, whether they are Australian government connections, state government connections, whether they're here, whether they are in export markets that you choose. Really having the right people in place to help guide you, for you to bounce ideas off. It's really important to ensure those connections are in place. Having the capability, we've spoken to that already a little bit, and it's a commitment. And that comes from the top down. It's ensuring everyone is aligned on those export goals. Cash, we spoke to cash flow. I cannot stress how important it is. Without the adequate cash flow, you are going to put yourselves under a lot of stress. And also your cost to serve. What do we mean by that? It talks to your export costs, your distributor or agent costs, your retailer costs. You may have tariffs, duties. You've got promotional costs. So these are all the things that need to be factored in to really swing it round to what can be measured as sustainable export success. In terms of setting some KPIs, and again, these are fairly straightforward. I guess most people would look at a sales, whether it's a dollar turnover or percentage that export may generate in terms of your total revenue. It could be what margins that you're looking to make. So that's very, it really talks to itself. What is a timeline? For many of you, you may be looking at, well, maybe in 6 months' time, I might be ready to put my toe in the water. Or I don't think I'm going to be ready for 12 months. I still need to develop my Australian market. So, being really realistic on times in terms of what your timeline is. Responsibility, who's got the responsibility? Who's that point person within the organization? Who'll take responsibility and keep reporting on it. I guess budget is to a degree aligned to sales, but have a budget in place, and whilst your budget is locked in, make sure that you're able to not so much adjust the budget, but you've got latest estimates or forecasts that you are measuring your performance against. How many markets are you looking to enter? For many, it might be initially we'll start with one market for the first 6 months, and then we'll look at number 2 and 3 to cover the next 6 months after that. So again, it's having that clarity on being realistic in terms of the number of markets you wish to engage with. Your technology uptake. Are you staying abreast of technology? Are you at the leading curve of technology? Make sure that you're not falling behind, and certainly in terms of a competitive advantage overseas, that could affect you. Customer outcomes. Whom are you selling to? In a particular market, are you opening up more channels? Just have a plan in place in terms of what is the end sale looking like in terms of the reach that you're looking to have, which is closely aligned with partnerships that you're able to secure. So have your KPIs in place, and more importantly, make sure that they are realistic. In terms of resourcing for export success, again, we've talked to a few of these, but it's putting a lot of the information, some of it's new, into one page. Just ensuring that you've got the appropriate expertise within the business. Cash flow we've spoken to. Ensure that your time requirements are suitable to get the right resourcing in place for the business. Your management and staff buy-in, have everyone aligned. Production capacity is there, or you know that at a certain point in time, you are going to be able to meet a higher level of production requirement, or in markets that your Australian product may require some adoption, particularly food and beverage. There are certain areas where claims may not be able to be made on labels, or certain ingredients are banned in certain markets. So having the back-end resources, whether it's through QA and QC, having the capability to adapt. Market access, again, understanding what are the requirements to get into a particular market. I mentioned earlier, through not only through government, whether state or federal, you can get better understanding of what are the requirements. In terms of travel, cannot highlight that as being absolutely important to get on a plane, get into the market, understand what you're up against, understand who your competitors are, really understand where the opportunities lie. And particularly trade fairs are important to be able to get to. Even if you don't take a booth, just walking the aisles in your particular category will give you, so much more information than by trying to go through Google or AI. Documentation requirements, again, depending on the nature of your business, some will be slightly more onerous, others a little bit less. Part of the challenges for some businesses in the food and beverage space is that they've got to put down all their ingredients used in a product, the percentage of each item, which often businesses will turn around and say, but I'm giving away my recipe. It's not necessarily the case around it. So as I'm saying, in certain cases, it's more onerous, and others, it's not nearly as difficult. Logistics, what you don't know, there are people out there, particularly freight forwarders, who can help you. But internally, making sure that product is, the correct product is picked, it's loaded, it's going to freight forwarders. So there needs to be someone in the business within which to manage it. To what extent you're going to require legal assistance, again, depending on market, depending on the nature of your business. You may want to be drafting contracts of sale. You've got your IP registrations, your brand registrations, and that type of thing. But again, legal is going to be to sort of what suits you and where you're at, but it can certainly help you by taking the appropriate actions in overseas markets for protection. Internal training, ensuring everyone's up to speed in terms of what you're doing, what the plans are. Do you have the appropriate data infrastructure? I'm talking more to the typical Agtech equipment, farm-related product over here. Do you have the appropriate after-sales technical support? I mentioned that earlier. Someone picks up the phone or emails. As a user of the product, you want a response pretty quickly. Do you have the ability to provide that, or do you need to resource through an extra head in the business? Do you need extra partnering? What are your networks like? And then finally, as I mentioned a short while ago, your sustainability, looking at what you do, how can you improve, what is the roadmap to improve your sustainability journey? Looking at some of the barriers to export. So, yep, it's not all plain sailing. There are barriers that do exist. certain markets are going to have access requirements. There's going to be, for all markets, the regulatory compliance. As I've mentioned a few times already, product specific will determine what is the regulatory compliance. In some cases, it may be quite onerous testings that are required. But some markets are going to be fairly low level. Depending on product, depending on service, to what extent are taxes, any excise duties, are there going to be any quotas in place? My guess is on the quotas side of things, I can't see that really happening. Shipping and handling requirements, depending, again, product dependent. Can you get product overseas into your overseas market securely, safely, without passing through too many hands, so to speak? Non-conforming product labels, perhaps more applicable to your food and beverage space. Again, depending on how your product is packaged, packaging may be a barrier. Also, unit sizes. Talking again, more food and beverage. You may have a product that is, called it 500 mil as an example, but the market is 200 mil. Can you adapt? So, your existing product may represent a barrier to the export. Banned ingredients speaks for itself. Any certifications. The one that is typically required is what's called HACCP, Hazard and Critical Control Point Analysis. There may be certificates of free sale, and certainly other technical documentations that need to either be submitted beforehand to a distributor, to a government department. Quite often in certain countries, you log on to the customs control portal and you upload documentation into their portals. But in other cases, you'll find that your distributor will manage a lot of the information submissions that you supply to them. There's obviously data privacy, cybersecurity restrictions that could be at play. I've talked to after-sales support. Depending on the type of product, customs could be relatively complex. Regulatory approvals could take a few months. Certain countries, as an example, Indonesia, it's fairly common to get a product approved. I'm talking food and beverage again, between 8 and 12 months from the time product is submitted to its actual approval for sale in that market. And then you've got supply chain disruptions, which certainly are caused by external events. As an example, issues in the Middle East in recent times, the Red Sea, not closed, but people taking the safer option of routing product around Africa. There's been, probably our largest one was COVID. Hopefully we never have to live through that again. So there's a whole bunch of barriers that could impact your export plans. Regarding choosing your target market, so probably the simplest way that we look to apply this is through what we like to term the 5 Ws. Who is the buyer or decision maker for your product? Is it a consumer? Is it a farmer, distributor, retailer? Is it a co-op, government, agribusiness? And really importantly, what are they buying it for? There's a couple of options in terms of consumption, processing, solving a production challenge, solving herd challenges, things like that, novel products, or for your customer to meet compliances. When are they buying or adopting? Is it seasonal? Is it based on budget cycles or harvest periods or project timelines? Where are they buying or adopting? through local market acquisition, export destinations, through online platforms or direct contracts. And why will they choose you? Through quality, innovation, cost savings that you're able to offer, great productivity, you're meeting sustainability goals, and you're able to support and meet the regulatory requirements for the market. Finding your market size. So the approach that many businesses take, and it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, it's a good way to look at, well, what can I actually export? And we try and drill that down to 3 concepts known as TAM, SAM, and SOM. So it ultimately helps you, and it's not 100% accurate, but it's a guide. Helps you set realistic expectations for long-term planning. So TAM would be your ultimate market opportunity. So it stands for total addressable market. It assumes every customer you could possibly reach without restrictions like pricing or geography. The SAM, service available market, narrows down the segments that you can effectively get to. And then the SOM is serviceable, obtainable market. So this gets down to a more realistic level of being able to get success in the market based on competition, resources, marketing, etc. So your SOM could be 2%, it could be 5%, 10% of your TAM. So it's just worthwhile giving that consideration. It obviously would be required to have a clear understanding of the total market, and that could be through research, through multiple sources, and leaning on in-market experts to help you sort of drill down between the 3 levels. So choosing products for export. For some of you, it's going to be simply a case of the product or service that I am producing currently is 100% the product that I'm going to be exporting. For others, it's probably, well, we know that product or service X and Y, you've got X, Y, and Z, so to speak, are absolutely suitable for the Australian market, but based on our knowledge and research and our own internal metrics in terms of profitability, in terms of capacity, etc., we may only choose one of those products for export. So domestic is going to be based on, well, what is the ultimate size of your portfolio? What brand or range or service offer is your standout? And also understanding the 80-20 rule. Again, this depends if you've got a range of products. Obviously, in this case, 20% of your products doing 80% of your volume. So well, if you're able to identify that there may be 1 or 2 products or services within your domestic range that could be suitable for export, identify those, which is it that's going to be your hero. And it may relate to, does it have the highest profit margin in terms of production turnaround, in terms of meeting greater demand in the market of choice? So there's a few criteria that come into play in choosing between the one and the other. Looking at some key market selection factors. So this talks to a concept that we refer to as desirability. So again, it's fairly top, sort of high level. What is the economic situation like in that particular country? What is the GDP of that country like? Now, all of this information is generally going to be available on the net or through AI. So having a really good understanding of the economy of a particular country, what is GDP, but also what is the overall growth trends, which I'll get into in a short while, of that particular market. In the ideal world, you want to be working with a country that's got a sound economy, inflation's under control, consumption's under control. In terms of the demographics, you're ticking the right boxes. It's not too third world, so to speak, where your product or service will struggle to get a take up. What's the socio-political situation like? Certain markets will be, I guess, a little bit more testy as such than others. As an example, as a business Export Connect, we're working with some Cambodian growers. And for those of you, I'm sure you're all aware, there's been some tension between Cambodia and Thailand. And in certain circumstances, the farmers of the companies that we're working with and the helpers on that land have had to be relocated away from the trouble. So these are the kind of things that could impact where and how you play. The market size and growth, tightly tied into the economy of the country. What is the if you can historically find out what the CAGR has been, and CAGR stands for compound annual growth, what has it been over the last few years, and what is it likely to be in the next 3, 4, or 5 years? So in the ideal world, you want an economy that's growing, but you also want a market size that is growing as well. If in both counts they're negative, well, then chances are there may be slightly more difficult take-up of your product or service. Category size and trends, again, linked in fairly closely to your market size. You may be looking at a specific category. And try to get some information. What are the trends? What people are buying into? What is being required for that particular area that you're trying to cover off? What is the competitive presence like in that particular market? There may be certain markets that one looks at, and after careful consideration, you think, well, that market is being serviced by the US, by Europe, by Asia, already by other Australians. It's going to be really, really tough to crack it. So does that market therefore become less desirable? So have a great understanding of what does your competitor presence look like. Consumer and channel trends, talking a little bit more again to food and beverage. What's happening with consumer trends? We're seeing in so many markets, not only Australia, the leaning is to natural, it's to good for you, it's to, in part organic. We see these are the growth factors certainly in all markets. We're seeing what channel trends are taking, the advent of online, how it absolutely went ballistic through the COVID years, and in many markets continues to grow very strongly, and the efficiencies, certainly through the digitalization in many markets. So understanding how the channels are working, your online, your offline, your digital, your speed of the convenience that people can get product from the minute they order it to when they get it. Understanding trade data. Now it's depending on how and where you look. Trade data is typically subscribed data. In this case, what we're talking about is how much of that particular category or product does a particular country import, and where is it coming from? But talked earlier, reach out to state government, federal, where you can. Try to get a better understanding of the market or service that you're in, what is that looking like from a being imported into that country, which obviously is linked to competitive presence. And then free trade agreements. Australia is very lucky to have significant free trade agreements with most, if not all, Asian countries. Certainly in some markets, the tariff that's applied is coming down. India is a massive market, given obviously the population size, and through recent signing of a free trade agreement, doesn't mean everything is free, but certain categories that were 40 or 50% a while back, are now starting to nudge down to 10 or 15%. So, it's important to understand to what extent you're going to be or not impacted by any tariffs. From the Agtech market selection factors, do you have the right fit from a segmentation point of view? In your particular space, can you get an understanding what the growth rate is and the take-up rate is within that particular market? What is the technology adoption like in that happening in a market? What are the capabilities? You may have a product or service that requires high-level capability. Will it work in that particular market that you're looking at? Similar to the previous slide, trade and tariff environment. I've got a marker over there, HS codes. For those of you who aren't familiar with HS, it's called the harmonization system. And every country in the world have HS codes for pretty much every product, and it is super detailed. For those of you who, after this session or at another point in time, want to get a better understanding of what HS codes are, pop onto the DFAT department of, or the DFAT website, and that's where you can start punching into the HS code sort of drop down in terms of what your product is, and you're exporting from Australia to a particular market. And then it breaks it down. It typically starts off with 4 numbers, and then depending on product, it will break it down to your specific product, and it will tell you what tariffs may or may not be applicable against your product. HS codes I haven't really covered off to much extent in this presentation. Something that we will certainly look at in more detail in the country-specific ones that we'll be looking at over the next 2 months. Your competitive landscape, similar to the previous slide, you are going to have competition, most likely understand what it is, what the regulatory and data environment is looking like. What is infrastructure and connectivity in that particular market? Where so much development is cloud-based, and connectivity towards that and the support systems around that, will the market that you select be able to factor that in? Demand and customer profile, understanding ideally whom the likely customers are in that market, what is their demand looking like for your product or service, and similar to what I've talked previously, what are the risk factors associated? Do you need IP protection? We're going to move through a Singapore market overview. I'm going to do it relatively quickly. As part of our submission for this presentation, we did advise that we're going to try to put everything that we're talking to be a little bit more market specific related. So the next number of slides will just give you more of a practical on the ground approach to the Singapore market. So from an economic and demographic indicator, now what we usually do is take a particular market and we compare it to the Australian market. So a couple of these, the information on the left-hand side I've spoken to already. But in this particular instance, GDP for Singapore under current prices measured in United States dollars is 564 billion. You can see Australia is probably just over 3 times that amount, but obviously we've got a far bigger population. Real GDP growth rate for Singapore slightly ahead of Australia at 2%. GDP per capita, 92,000, which is pretty good compared to Australia. The population size, obviously, roughly 25% of Australia. Human Development Index. Now that's a United Nations measurement in terms of freedom of speech, access to healthcare, access to education, the rule of law. So in terms of an Asian country, the HDI for Singapore is pretty good. We see some not so great results in certain Asian countries, and Australia is very good at 7. The Logistics Performance Index talks to product arriving at the port in Singapore, the clearances, the getting product from port to warehouses, the infrastructure, the customs, etc. Now, Singapore is probably, if not the largest port in the world. High percentage of ships going into Singapore or only offloading a small part of their cargo and is leaving Singapore. So again, being a very small island, it's highly sophisticated, highly developed. No surprises why it's number one. Australia, 19. So top line, some Agtech trends. So very top line, since literally over the last 13 or so years, or 12, 13 years, 1.5 billion USD has been raised by Singapore Agrifood tech startups. Between 20 and 23, the SE Asian Agri-Food tech ecosystem grew at a staggering 54% compound annual growth, with Singapore being the largest contributor towards that growth. And the government has committed another 240 million USD in urban agriculture, aquaculture, alternative protein, and food safety. I'm not going to go through in detail all of these. There's quite a bit of information, but I think one of the most important takeouts in this particular page is Singapore have set a 30 by 30 goal to be able to locally produce 30% of their nutritional needs by 2030. Currently, Singapore, mostly for food and beverage, but they have a 90% or 90% of the consumption is imported. So that's a pretty aggressive approach, and it's something that they are diligently following. Whether they reach it, I mean, obviously would be a great outcome for Singaporeans and for that market should they do. So they're investing heavily in vertical farming, in aquaculture, climate resilient. So there's a lot of support through urban integration and consumer engagement. They're a huge market for the alternative protein development, which is part of its food security strategy. Tells you where their focus is. And smart agri-systems, integrating IoT, for those of you who aren't aware, IoT, Internet of Things, AI, data analytics, automation. So it's happening aggressively. There's a lot of high focus to get this moving. So it's a world-class infrastructure. There's purpose-built facilities, access to funding and investors. It's very active VC network there. Singapore's able to draw a global talent pool, as most of you, or if not all, will know, high level of expats living there. Across multiple sectors, the government strongly supporting behind it. And it's a progressive regulatory framework. it's transparent, it's efficient, and giving a lot of emphasis to novel food approvals. Just touching on food and beverage trends. Convenience is, as I've mentioned a short while ago, it's becoming really important. It's a huge trend that's happening. The rise of single-person households, and this is not just a Singapore feature, it's an Asian feature by and large. Urbanization is growing, there's longer work hours, people are time poor. That they need convenience, they need product here and now. There's growth of prepared foods, meal kits, and eating out at restaurants. And given the growth of digitalization, which you can see on the other side, it's got massive internet penetration, the apps that are available, ordering, getting product delivered, sometimes within the hour. It's the whole digitalization process in Singapore, but other Asian markets is huge. And health focus, I spoke to that a short while ago. The focus on health has really been driven out of COVID. High priority on health and well-being. There's increased vegan, vegetarianism around, meat consumption's dropping back, and nutrition. The labels are becoming more important for people to understand what they're eating. Just a quick food and bev overview. I'm not going to spend much time on the next slide at all, but it just takes you through total grocery retail, supermarkets, hypermarkets, convenience, food service, and food e-commerce. So what the CAGR was, what the market size is in millions of US dollars at 2024, what the expected CAGR will be, which is a forecasted value over a period of time. I guess looking at food e-commerce, top right-hand side, it grew by 21%, and that was ultimately driven through COVID. And even though it's dropped back to 3.8%, it still has the highest CAGR compared to any of the other market segments. Many of you may have visited Singapore, whether it's for work, whether it's for holiday, etc. I'm not going through each of these supermarket banners. There's a whole bunch of them. Fair Price and Cold Storage dominate in terms of the supermarket scene. QSRs, a lot of them around, and then the key online platforms. The grocers will have their online platforms, but others that are more dedicated to online only, Lazada, Shopee, Amazon, Foodpanda, etc. Let me move on. In terms of the Agtech competitive landscape, the market's driven by controlled environment agriculture and aquaculture tech and alternative proteins. So in those particular areas, there is a lot of competition developing. It's very innovation driven. Strategic partnerships are being built. There's a lot of JVs, R&D happening, licensing agreements, particularly with Singaporean firms. And the importance of this is it reduces time to market and in turn opens up distribution networks. The smaller companies, opportunities for them are in underserved areas like aquaculture tech, ag, biotech inputs, and tropical crop genetics. These are just some case studies to go through in your own time. I'm not opening up. So each of these is a live link to Sustainer, to Tyndall, to Artisan, and Sophie's Bio-Nutrients. This just talks very briefly to who these particular companies are. But, perhaps for your own benefit, it's going to take too much time to open up each company and look what they do, what they're about, what their journey is about. But certainly for those of you who are looking for a little bit of inspiration, I encourage you to have a look once these slides have been emailed to you. Sustainability and climate value. As I mentioned earlier, Singapore imports 90% of their food, so they're vulnerable to supply chain issues and geopolitical shocks. So it in turn leads to making sustainability crucial to their market, which in turn means there's high demand for technologies that reduce water use, cut carbon emissions, improve soil and crop resilience. From a consumer point of view, Singaporeans are more receptive to products with transparent sustainability credentials. It's not only the products, but it's the company. More and more people are looking to the company behind a brand or behind a service. What are they doing in the sustainability world? Are they demonstrating the sort of any measurable impacts that they're having for the climate in general? So just some top line points on leveraging sustainability and climate values. From a positioning point of view, framing your product as mission critical for Singapore's food security, being able to quantify as best as possible sustainability metrics. Can you reference data from trials in tropical or humid conditions to show your tech works in a similar environment? In terms of partnerships, collaboration with local R&D centers, leveraging programs such as Enterprise Singapore's, they've got startup grants or R&D programs for funding and technical support, and tell your story, showcase real world results from projects with similar climates, such as Northern Australia. Whether you're in that area or can you test yourselves in that market as part of building your sustainability journey. So that's more or less on time to get us to a short break. At the top of the session, we indicated it can be used for a Q&A. I'm just looking to Alexia whether there are some questions.
I've just opened it up to the chat if anyone's got any questions, or maybe we have a quick break and have a think of any questions and come back.
Yep. So we're looking at just on 20 to 11. So maybe 10 to.
Sounds good.
So for all of you, please log if you're leaving your desk or area. We'll look to get this going at 10 to.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Howard, and have a nice cup of tea. I know how difficult it is to be talking for so long. So amazing.
Thank you.